Hey, Maui from Gamma Goons here, and this is the first video in a series I will be making that provides further evidence and fixes for the timeline I have created. That doesn't mean the ideas in this video can only apply to my timeline. Rather, some elements of this theory work as evidence to help my timeline, and others will require me to change my timeline theory. So, with that out of the way, let's get into it. Time travel in the Zelda series. If you ask most people, it doesn't have cohesion and plays by different rules depending on how the time travel took place. Someone might say the gates in Skyward Sword create a time loop, so everything that happens in Skyward Sword's past always happened. Then they would say time travel using the Ocarina of Time creates a split in the timeline, and time travel with the Master Sword sitting in the pedestal of time creates a bridge that moves forward, so when you go back to your childhood, you can actively change the future. I can see how you could come to these conclusions. However, every single one of these assumptions has an example that disproves it. In Skyward Sword, there's a quest where to heal the Thunder Dragon, he needs a fruit. The only problem being, they only have one seedling of the tree that produces the fruit, and it's in a location that will become a desert. How do we fix this? Well, we plant the seedling in the past in a location that doesn't turn into a desert, and in the future it's fully grown. But wait, isn't all Skyward Sword's past events predestined? So shouldn't the tree have always been there? Also, in Majora's Mask, we see Link travel back in time multiple times using the Ocarina, but we don't see a bunch of timelines splitting off Majora's Mask. Then in Ocarina of Time, you learn the Song of Storms from the music box man in the windmill of Kakariko Village in the future. But wait, he learned that song from you after you travel back in time after you learned it from him. So this event is predestined, but Master Sword time travel should only change the future, not be predestined. In a series where they care enough about the consistency of the visual of Zelda telepathically talking to you, I find it very hard to believe that they wouldn't care about the consistency of time travel. And spoiler alert, they very much care about the consistency of time travel. First, I'm going to explain how time travel works, and then based on those rules, we'll look at specific instances of it, and only using our rules, determine how it should work, and you will be shocked at how accurately we can predict the outcome of an event that occurred during time travel. So how do I claim time travel works in the series? Well, first, the act of traveling backwards in time has no effect whatsoever. It only makes a difference when an event takes place in the past that was traveled to. Let's call these events fracture points. When a fracture point occurs, it can have three outcomes. It can change the future, it can change reality so that it always happened and will always happen, even if it causes itself, and it can split the timeline. But what rules dictate whether a fracture point has one of these effects? Well, it's surprisingly simple. You can view reality as an organism that will grow forever in a single direction. This growth is what's perceived as time in that reality. This organism has DNA that tells it how it should grow. This is destiny, and it is the will of a god like Hylia. If time travel is something that is part of the will of a god, then those events will have always happened. However, if this time travel is not destiny, then the fracture points that occur have two options. If the fracture point doesn't completely break continuity, then it will heal itself by changing reality at the end of the timeline. However, if the fracture point so thoroughly breaks continuity that the events that have happened can no longer happen, the timeline will break into two. During this break, both timelines will make attempts to heal back to each other, but unfortunately be unable to, causing time to continue moving forward in both realities. However, a consequence of this would be that time travel to events prior to the creation of a new reality would be impossible. So now that you understand how time travel works, let's play a game I call Who's That Fracture Point? In Skyward Sword, when Zelda goes to the past and seals herself away in the Sealed Grounds temple, is that A, a god's will, B, a fracture point that must be healed, or C, a complete break of continuity that causes a timeline split? That's right, it's A. We know this because Zelda is following Hylia's, aka a god's plan. So we should expect to see evidence that she was always sealed in the temple, which we can see is true at the beginning of the game. Next, let's look at the life tree seedling. Is planting the life seedling in the Sealed Grounds temple past A, a god's will, B, a fracture point that must be healed, or C, a complete break of continuity that causes a timeline split? Yep, B it is. We know this is not part of Hylia's plan, as it is an optional side quest, and we know continuity can be restored by having the tree appear in the future. So we should expect the tree to just appear in the future, and the timeline not to split. All time travel that takes place in Zelda canon follows these rules. Now, when looking at the timeline split we all agree upon in Ocarina of Time, the fracture point is not when Link is sent back to his childhood with the Ocarina. Remember, I said traveling back in time doesn't actually change anything. Rather, It occurs when Link warns the royal family about Ganondorf with the Triforce of Courage as his proof. This is what prevents Ganondorf from getting the Triforce, which completely breaks the continuity that exists. There's nothing that can be simply changed about reality at the end of the current timeline that would allow for this event to occur. That is why, with all the time travel shenanigans in Ocarina of Time, only one other timeline is created. Now, in my recent timeline video, I made the claim that a timeline split should occur at the end of Skyward Sword. The fracture point that causes this split is when Link kills Demise in the past. When this occurs, there is nothing that can be changed at the end of the timeline to allow Link to have killed Demise and the events that took place in Skyward Sword to occur. The only way for both events to occur is to split the timeline. You may then say, okay, but Zelda doesn't give Impa the bracelet and Link doesn't place the Master Sword in the pedestal until after Demise is defeated. But remember that I said the timeline will try to heal itself in response to the break. We see this in both newly formed timelines while they are still unstable. In the past, Link places the Master Sword in the pedestal. This is a fracture point that can be fixed by making the Master Sword appear in the pedestal at the end of the timeline, which happens. And then from the beginning of the game, we can see Impa has the bracelet. This means it is a destined event that is part of Hylia's will. However, Link went and broke continuity before Zelda could give Impa the bracelet, so the timeline tried to heal itself by having Zelda still give Impa the bracelet. But since the timelines at this point are no longer compatible, they start to exist as their own realities, the past continuing to grow past the fracture point, and the future continuing to grow past the wish to destroy Demise. Now, with this new information, we know that a Master Sword exists in both timelines, and the timeline that grows from the past will also have a Goddess Sword that hasn't been forged into a Sacred Blade, and the Triforce will remain in Skyloft. Another instance of time travel I want to look at is time travel from Tears of the Kingdom, and why it doesn't create a new timeline, but still does have non-destined fracture points that change reality. So, spoiler warning for Tears of the Kingdom, skip to the timestamp on the screen if you haven't collected all the memories. Alright, with that out of the way, let's talk Tears of the Kingdom. One thing we know for a fact is that Zelda appearing in the past is destined time travel. We know this because of two events that occur before Zelda travels back in time. The first is that while making your way through the catacombs at the very beginning of the game, the mural depicts Zelda becoming a dragon, even if it was covered by debris. The second is that Ganondorf knows who Zelda and Link are when he awakens. This is because Rauru told him to remember the name Link, which he only learned from the time-traveling Zelda. Even if Rauru says that was a world where Zelda didn't appear, that world doesn't exist, because Zelda has always appeared. Almost all events in Tears of the Kingdom's past are destined events, a lot like Skyward Sword. However, there is one event in particular that was not destined, and that's when Dragon Zelda leaves the Dragon Tears all over the land. That's why they didn't appear until the upheaval, meaning it was Zelda's free will that left those for Link, not destiny. Another really funny consequence of these rules of time travel is that the Music Box Man in Ocarina of Time teaching you the Song of Storms is a destined event. So I like to think he somehow pissed off a god before the events of Ocarina of Time, causing that god to make listening to the same song for 7 years his destiny. Alright, let's wrap up everything that this theory supports about my timeline and everything it changes. The things it supports about my timeline is the timeline split in Skyward Sword occurring and the Goddess Sword appearing in Tears of the Kingdom. What needs to be changed is the Master Sword being forged between Four Swords Adventures and A Link to the Past. When I made the timeline, I forgot the Master Sword was left in the past, so I came up with a good placement for it to be forged. However, since it already exists, this is no longer required, and we don't need to add a Master Sword forging event to the Triforce timeline either, because we can see at the end of Skyward Sword, reality warped it into existence trying to heal from the fracture point that occurred when Link left it in the past. Thank you so much for watching. Next video, I will be talking about how all the child timeline references exist in Tears of the Kingdom, and why their existence in Tears of the Kingdom actually prove they can't take place in the child timeline. Also, if you liked the video, drop a like, and if you loved it, hit that subscribe button. By the way, we have a Discord and Twitch channel, so check those out, the links are in the description. Alright, peace.